The story begins in a psychiatric facility. The man on the hospital bed is undergoing a medical procedure that is used at the time to treat severe mental illness. After the treatment, he enters a period of prolonged confusion, and his physical condition also changes significantly. The man lying on that hospital bed is none other than John Nash, the mathematician who later receives the Nobel Prize in economics. It is hard to imagine that a man who eventually changes modern economics is now unable to accurately judge even the reality in front of him. And all of this begins decades earlier. In 1947, John Nash enters Princeton University. The school is home to some of the best mathematical minds in the country, but Nash is completely different from the other students. While everyone else is busy attending classes, he rarely shows up. While others study the theories of those who come before them, he remains determined to find a breakthrough of his own. In Nash's view, continuing along paths that others have already taken makes it difficult to create something truly original. So he prefers to stay alone in his dorm room and study all kinds of complex problems. He observes everything around him, even trying to find mathematical connections in the patterns of pigeons. But after spending a long time studying, he still gets no result. Meanwhile, one classmate after another produces research of their own, while Nash still has no paper that proves his ability. Some people begin making fun of him, believing that this highly promising young man is simply wasting his time. The school review is approaching, and if things continue this way, he may not even get the research position he wants. His advisor also reminds him that talent alone is far from enough. In the end, a mathematician still needs to produce meaningful work. Just when Nash reaches a dead end, a discussion in a bar suddenly gives him a new direction. Several people are discussing how to approach the same woman. Under the traditional competitive approach, everyone wants to win over the most popular one. But if everyone chooses the same target, they may interfere with one another. And in the end, nobody gets the result they want. Nash sees a new question in this ordinary situation. What if people stop considering only their own choices and also take everyone else's actions into account? Could this eventually create a stable outcome that works better for everyone? The idea immediately sends Nash back to his research. He starts rethinking competition in economic activity and discovers that individual interests and overall interests do not necessarily have to conflict. If participants adjust their strategies according to the choices of others, a stable outcome can emerge. Nash expresses this state mathematically, eventually developing what becomes known as the Nash equilibrium. The theory changes the way people understand competition and cooperation, and for the first time, his advisor realizes that this seemingly isolated young man has made an important breakthrough. Nash receives the research opportunity he wants and gradually enters the academic world. Later, Nash uses his exceptional mathematical ability to enter a defense research institution and begins working on code analysis. Large amounts of complex information are being intercepted, containing patterns that are difficult to identify. Even with the help of computers, it is hard to find a breakthrough quickly. But when Nash looks at the numbers and symbols filling the screen, he can spot connections hidden in details that ordinary people cannot notice. He quickly identifies important information, leaving everyone around him amazed. It is also here that a mysterious man takes notice of Nash. He claims to be from the Department of Defense and introduces himself as William. He tells Nash that there is another highly specialized assignment that requires his mathematical ability. William takes him to a secret research location where the room is filled with newspapers, magazines, and all kinds of publicly available material. The contents appear completely unrelated, but they may contain important information. Nash's task is to search through these ordinary materials for patterns and determine whether they contain a special method of communication. The work seems almost perfectly suited to Nash. Every day, he studies huge amounts of newspapers and magazines, looking for connections between numbers, words, and images. As the research continues, he appears to discover one important coordinate after another. To complete the assignment, he is also instructed to enter a special drop-off location and place the organized materials inside. The first time he carries out the assignment, he is extremely nervous. But as similar tasks become more frequent, he gradually treats them as part of his daily life. At the same time, Nash meets Alicia. She is very different from the people he has known before. She does not deliberately keep her distance because of his unusual personality. The two gradually become closer. Nash is not good at expressing his emotions, but he always observes the world in his own unique way. During one date, he takes Alicia outside to look at the night sky and uses mathematics and shapes to explain the world as he sees it. Alicia gradually discovers that this man, who struggles to express himself, has a way of thinking that is difficult for an ordinary person to understand. The two eventually get married, but Nash's other life does not end. He continues carrying out assignments arranged by William. One night, as Nash finishes a task and prepares to leave, William suddenly appears and tells him that something has gone wrong and that they are being followed. Nash is forced to leave with William. The tense situation makes him increasingly alert. From then on, he constantly feels that someone is watching him. Strangers on the street, cars parked nearby, and even ordinary actions can make him suspicious. Alicia gradually notices that her husband's condition is becoming increasingly unstable. Even stranger, Nash often meets a man named Charles. This man appears to have been part of Nash's life for many years and seems to have a very close relationship with him, yet nobody else has ever seen him. Nash himself has no idea that anything is wrong. He remains completely convinced that Charles is real. At the same time, William continues giving him new assignments. Nash spends every day searching for so-called secret information, and the world around him gradually begins to overlap with the world he sees in his mind. The more he tries to prove that everything he sees is real, the harder it becomes for him to distinguish what actually happens from what his mind is creating. Eventually, Nash's condition becomes increasingly severe. During an important academic event, he faces a room full of people but suddenly sees people who are not actually there. He tries to avoid the people he believes are following him, leaving everyone around him confused. At this point, Nash is taken to a psychiatric facility. When he wakes up, he still believes that he is being controlled by his enemies and even suspects that the hospital itself is part of the plan. But the doctor and Alicia begin explaining reality to him piece by piece. Charles's niece and the mysterious William have never actually existed. Nash cannot accept this conclusion because, in his mind, these people have been part of his life for a very long time. To find out the truth, Alicia goes to Princeton University and investigates Nash's past. The result shocks her. The university records show that Nash never had a roommate named Charles. The friend who has been with him for years exists only within his perception. Alicia finally realizes that her husband's problem is not simply a memory error. His ability to judge reality has been seriously affected. After a period of treatment, Nash finally leaves the facility. But returning to ordinary life does not solve everything. He needs ongoing treatment and medication to maintain stability. Their life changes as a result. The couple moves from their previous comfortable surroundings into an ordinary home. Alicia takes on more of the responsibilities around the house, while Nash tries to return to mathematical research. However, the treatment also affects his mental performance. The Nash who once could remain immersed in mathematics for hours now struggles to maintain the same pace of research. He wants to solve mathematical problems again, but finds that he can no longer reach answers as quickly as he did when he was young. Family life also demands his attention. The children's crying, household responsibilities, and everyday tasks make it increasingly clear that he cannot simply return to the life he once had. Even more difficult, the visions do not completely disappear. Charles still appears in front of him. William still gives him new assignments. The young woman also continues to appear exactly as before. Nash begins to realize that he may not be able to simply erase these figures from his mind. In an attempt to recover the way he used to think, Nash makes a decision without his doctor's recommendation and stops taking his prescribed medication. Without the medication, his research ability does begin to change. His thoughts become more active again. He returns to mathematical research and begins to feel closer to his former state. But at the same time, the visions become clear again. William returns and tells Nash that the secret assignment is not finished. Nash believes him again and even sets up what he considers a secret location near his home. Alicia notices something is wrong and follows him. She eventually discovers that there is no secret operation at all. The room contains only newspapers, magazines, and information Nash has collected himself. At this point, Alicia finally understands that Nash's condition is becoming unstable again. More dangerously, Nash himself does not realize what is happening. He still believes that he is carrying out an important assignment, while the real world is completely different from what he imagines. Just as Alicia prepares to take him back to the hospital, Nash sees William again. William keeps influencing him and makes him believe that Alicia is the person standing in the way of the assignment. His real wife and the figures in his mind appear at the same time, and Nash becomes completely overwhelmed. Then he suddenly notices an important detail. Although these figures appear to him, they never truly change. Many years pass, yet Charles remains exactly the same. His niece never grows older. Nash finally realizes that real people change with time, while these figures remain fixed in his perception. This discovery gives Nash a new approach. Instead of trying to force the visions to disappear, he begins observing them. He gradually learns to distinguish what is happening in front of him from the images created by his mind. The visions continue to appear, but Nash no longer acts according to their instructions. The doctor wants Nash to continue long-term treatment, but Nash decides to try another approach. He knows he cannot guarantee that the visions will never return, but he wants to use his own judgment to prevent them from controlling his life. Alicia ultimately chooses to stay and support him. 2 months later, Nash returns to Princeton University. He knows this is the environment he once knew best, and he hopes that returning to mathematics and academic life will help him regain stability. But at first, he still sees the familiar figures. Sometimes he suddenly stops in public and speaks to people whom nobody else can see. Students find his behavior strange, and his colleagues do not know how to respond. But Nash does not leave. He begins sitting in on classes, returning to the library, and working on familiar mathematical problems. Every day he sees Charles, William, and the young woman, but he deliberately avoids interacting with them. Charles stands in the distance and reminds him of the past. William still tries to draw his attention to new assignments. Nash simply looks at them and walks away. This is not a sudden recovery. It becomes a long process that continues for years. Nash has to keep reminding himself that seeing something does not mean it is real, and hearing something does not necessarily mean it has happened. He gradually learns to treat these visions as a phenomenon of his own perception rather than people from the real world. Years pass, and Nash never stops researching. His mathematical thinking gradually improves, and he begins teaching students again. One day, a young student comes to his office and asks him about the Nash equilibrium. The theory that once helps him establish himself in the academic world has now become an important foundation of modern economics. Nash picks up his pen again and begins explaining his theory to the student. At this moment, he is once again a professor. The mathematician who once leaves the university because of his condition finally returns to the place he knows. Alicia continues waiting for him outside the university. She watches Nash return to work, communicate with students, and slowly rebuild his familiar life. Although the visions never completely disappear, Nash no longer allows them to determine what he does. One day, a stranger approaches Nash and brings him an important message. His name is being considered for the Nobel Prize. Nash does not immediately believe it. Over the years, he develops a habit of first confirming whether what he sees is real. He asks the students around him and confirms that they can see the stranger as well. Only after receiving their confirmation does Nash accept the news. The young man who once struggles to find a breakthrough at Princeton is now standing at the door of one of the world's highest academic honors. Nash then arrives at a familiar restaurant. This place once witnesses his desire for success when he is young, but now it becomes the setting for a completely different moment. An older professor approaches his table and places his pen in front of Nash. Then another professor takes out his own pen. More and more professors come forward and place their pens in front of him. To the people there, these are not ordinary gifts. They represent the highest form of recognition among academic peers. The young man who once sits alone in a corner searching for answers finally receives the recognition of the academic community. At the Nobel Prize ceremony, Nash stands on the stage. The man who spends years struggling with his condition and is once unable to distinguish reality from perception now stands in front of the world. But instead of focusing entirely on his own achievements, he gives his most important thanks to Alicia. During the most difficult period of Nash's life, Alicia remains by his side. When his career declines, when his life changes completely, and when his perception of reality becomes unstable again and again, she does not simply walk away. She watches Nash go from a confident young professor to the lowest point of his life, and then watches him slowly return to the university. After the ceremony, Nash returns to Alicia. In the distance, Charles, William, and the young woman are still standing there. They remain within Nash's field of vision, but this time, he does not walk toward them. Because he has learned the most important method of all. He can see them without believing them. He cannot make the visions disappear completely, but he can decide how he responds to them. He finally learns to distinguish the real world from the world created by his perception, and he regains control of his own life. This brings the story of A Beautiful Mind to an end. The film is based on the real-life experiences of John Nash. It is not simply a story about how a mathematical genius develops a theory and eventually receives the Nobel Prize. It is also the story of how a person gradually rebuilds his life after spending years at one of its lowest points. A brilliant mind can create extraordinary theories, but what truly helps a person move through a long life is sometimes not a single answer, but the people who are willing to stay by their side and the courage to begin again and again. Perhaps this is what A Beautiful Mind ultimately wants to tell us. Life does not require every difficulty to disappear before we can call it a victory. Sometimes the difficulty remains, but we learn not to let it decide the direction of our lives.